Reporting for us. Thanks very much. Let's get some more on all of this. A key member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York, is joining us. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us. I want to talk about North Korea and this latest tweet from Donald Trump in a moment, but let's get to Russia first. Do you believe that Russia did engage in these cyber attacks against the U.S.?
I have so much faith in our intelligence community. That has been where the large bulk of the evidence has been. There is the president, when he released the executive order last week, as well as the FBI and DHS putting out their report, did leave a few questions that are still unanswered. The president indicated that Congress was going to get some intelligence forwarded to us. I'm hoping that happens this week. So
you're still not convinced? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I just would like to know what President Obama says he wants to forward that he hasn't yet forwarded, and I would like to know what President-elect Trump says that he hasn't yet released. But so far, everything that has been released indicates Russia is responsible. And I do have a ton of faith in U.S. intelligence sources. So until I see something that contradicts it, that we can move on, Russia's responsible.
Yeah, they're excellent, the U.S. intelligence community, and their successes we often don't know much about. Their failures, like the weapons of mass destruction assessment leading up to the Iraq War, we know a lot about that. So it's always good to be a bit skeptical, but at the same time you listen and you learn. Listen to what Senator John McCain said in Ukraine about the Russian involvement. Listen to this.
When you attack a country, it's an act of war. And so we have to make sure that there is a price to pay so that we can perhaps persuade the Russians to stop this kind of attacks on our very fundamentals of democracy.
He's calling it an act of war. Do you agree with him?
Oh, cyber warfare is real. It is a huge threat. We need to take our cybersecurity extremely seriously. This is not just Russia, China. There are state actors, there are individual actors. This threatens the U.S. government, our infrastructure, companies. Individuals can open up an email that looks like a normal email. You click on a link, then all of a sudden it's getting spread out all through your company, into your other contacts in your email list. And the amount of sensitive information that has been released and can be is a real threat to our security. So absolutely, cyber warfare is warfare. And the best defense on it is a good offense.
So what's more appropriate right now, knowing everything you know, to go ahead and take these steps, sanctions, expelling Russian diplomats, making strong statements, or praising Putin?
Well, the key is to have a long game where we're thinking several steps ahead. I could think of 1,000 different ways to approach our relationship with Russia. We're talking cybersecurity and cyber attacks. I just got back from Afghanistan a few days ago. You look in the Middle East with Syria and Turkey and Iran and Russia's interactions, not just there, but elsewhere around the globe. So what we need to be able to do when we act, whether it is saying something or doing something that Putin may take as a compliment or an insult, it needs to be part of a longer strategy. You can't just fire one shot.
Because he did tweet this, Donald Trump, and I'll put this one up on the screen. After Donald Trump, he tweeted this after Putin decided not to retaliate by expelling American diplomats in exchange because of what the U.S. did to the Russian diplomats. He said this on December 30th, "Great move on delay by V. Putin. I always knew he was very smart!" Exclamation point. Was that appropriate?
Well, what would be best is if our president, our current president, and our next president could get more on the same page, because when they are contradicting each other with messaging at a moment or strategy over the course of days and weeks, it doesn't help the United States. But what is so important is, and by the way, Putin is a bad guy. He is not an ally of the United States. He should not be looked at as one. He is provocative. He's an aggressor. He does not have our interests. He meddles in areas where we have service members risking their lives and being put into harm's way. But what is so important, whatever strategy we choose, is that we are anticipating Putin's response and that we know what our response to that is going to be.
Trump never says any of those bad things about Putin.
Well, if there is a strategy and there is a long game where he can find diplomatic successes in engaging with Putin, where he thinks that he can make progress that can help us, if it's part of a long game that works, great. If it's not going to work and we need a more hostile approach, over the course of 8 years, President Obama in many ways was asking nicely with Russia on certain fronts. Just over a year ago, if we wanted to negotiate a truce in Syria, we could have done so if someone came up with the answer. you could have sat down at the table and Russia didn't need to be there. Now you can't negotiate truce without Russia being there. Vacuums have been created. The Russians have filled those vacuums, and certain elements of foreign policy has become a little bit more complicated because of it. So whatever strategy our president wants to take, whether it's President Obama or our next president, with regards to Vladimir Putin, it just needs to be part of a long game and not take it one step at a time.
Let's talk about North Korea for a moment. All of a sudden, Donald Trump issues this threat, and I think it's fair to call it a threat. He just tweeted this. I'll put it up on the screen. North Korea just stated that it is in the final stages of developing a nuclear weapon capable of reaching parts of the United States. It won't happen! Exclamation point. You see that as a threat? I assume you do.
No doubt. He is absolutely right. That should be America's foreign policy. That should be the world's foreign policy. And there are countries in that region who should be more involved, especially China, because that threat, I mean, intercontinental ballistic missiles is a threat when you're talking about the United States. There are delivery mechanisms for certain warfare closer to home for North Korea. It's scary that Kim Jong-un would look at calling him a maniac as a compliment. For him to be able to have nuclear capability that threatens the U.S. shores is something that absolutely cannot happen.
But how do you think Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, he reacts to a statement like this by Donald Trump?
It's actually the president-elect is right. I mean, you can't allow North Korea to get their hands on nuclear weapons. It's not that the president-elect in his tweet was making fun of Kim Jong-un and trying to provoke. He's saying what really should be American foreign policy, and has been American foreign policy, is that we cannot allow Kim Jong-un to have his hands on a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, I wonder, what he's talking about when it won't happen, a preemptive strike, a military strike. Who knows what could happen on the Korean Peninsula in retaliation for that, given the North Korean capabilities. But maybe he's still hopeful that China could intervene. China still has influence in North Korea. Donald Trump keeps saying he's going to rely on China to get the job done. We'll see if that happens. Congressman, I need you to stand by. We have some breaking news coming into the Situation Room right now. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is questioned as part of a criminal investigation into alleged corruption. Stand by. We have new details and the Prime Minister's reaction right after this. There's breaking news out of Israel right now where police say the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been interrogated in a criminal investigation. Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin is back with us. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. We'll get his reaction. I want to get the latest, though, from Jerusalem right now. CNN's Oren Lieberman is on the story for us. Oren, tell our viewers what's going on.
Wolf, the big news tonight is that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is officially a suspect in a criminal investigation. Israeli police and the Attorney General say Netanyahu is suspected of receiving gifts from businessmen. They won't say too much more about that at this point. They say to do so, to reveal that information, would bias the investigation one way or the other. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has responded repeatedly here, saying there will be nothing found against him and that all of these accusations are false. Let me read you part of a statement he posted on his Facebook page yesterday. Unfortunately, you'll have to be disappointed this time as well, like you were disappointed on previous affairs. As usual, there will not be anything because there is nothing. Try replacing the Prime Minister at the ballot box, as is customary in a democracy. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly reiterated this statement. There he's referencing a criminal investigation from his first term back in the late 90s. That, too, started as a criminal investigation but never led to any charges. Netanyahu was never indicted. Now, this began about 6 months ago as an inquiry or an examination. There was no suspicion of a crime just yet. But the Attorney General says last month there was evidence that they found that led them to believe a crime had been committed, and that led to the launching of the criminal investigation this evening. Police investigators questioning Netanyahu for some 3 hours tonight.
Yeah, I saw the statement that the Israeli police released. The central unit of the Israeli police interrogated tonight under caution the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, on suspicion of allegedly receiving benefits. That interrogation, as they call it, that went on, for 3 hours? We saw the police vehicles going into the Prime Minister's residence. Was it a 3-hour, quote, interrogation?
Exactly. We saw them pull in at about 6:30 this evening, and they were there until about 9:30. And the words you pointed out, under caution, are very important in this case. Police only use those words when someone is suspected of having committed a crime. What does that mean? It means Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel here is a criminal suspect. Now, what does that mean in the big picture? What does that mean for Netanyahu's leadership of Israel? At the moment, nothing. He doesn't have to do anything until he's indicted. Even then, he may not have to resign or step down. Under Israeli law, he is allowed to stay prime minister until he is convicted of a crime and until that conviction is upheld upon appeal by the Israeli High Court. Now, if he is indicted of a serious crime, he may face enormous public pressure and political pressure to step down. But, Wolf, it's important to point out we're not there yet. This is the beginning of a criminal investigation. Any of the next steps, although they may happen quickly, they may also take weeks, months, or even more than a year.
Oren Lieberman reporting for us from Jerusalem. Oren, thank you very much. Let's get some reaction. Lee Zeldin is a congressman from New York, Long Island. You're a strong supporter of Israel. You hear this report, Congressman. You're a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. What's your reaction?
Well, I'd like to get more details as exactly what the charges are, what the evidence is.
So far, there's no charges, but there's suspicion.
And if there is any information that would allow the international community, for us as Americans, to be able to form an opinion on our own, that would be great. I mean, we have a system here in the United States that we deeply respect and we admire. They have one in Israel that they are following their protocols. We happen to have a prime minister who is in charge of a nation that is a great ally of the United States. And that strength of that bond between Americans and Israelis is one that is very strong. So we don't want to rush to judgment at all when we're talking, especially when we're talking about the prime minister of a nation that is such a strong ally. So they're following the protocol. Hopefully nothing happened at all, and we can continue to strengthen that relationship.
You know, the former prime minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, he's in jail right now, serving 19 months after he was convicted. He had to step down as prime minister of Israel. So there is a history here, if you will.
Well, I sure hope that what might have been experienced in the past in their nation isn't one to reflect on what is potentially getting alleged here now.
It's a serious, serious situation. All right, Lee Zeldin, thanks very much for coming in.